Okay, hopefully wrapping it up here at the end. Wrapping up Amitav Ghosh. He gets done with whatever feud he had with the people in Yemen and heads back there in the 1140s. Um, he has greater wealth due to his time in India. Um, he worked in Aden as a Jewish judge, but his son Sarur died in Aden, and that made him very sad to stay there. So he moved up to a city up in the mountains. Um, he had a lot of trouble keeping up with his family, the family back in Africa, in Ifriqiya, back in Tunisia. Um, they had moved to Sicily because of some very difficult problems there, and Sicily was also a bad place. So they were trying to get to Egypt, where Ben Yiju had passed through on his way to Aden. And he wants his daughter, Sittadar, uh, to marry the son of his brother, and the son of his brother is also named Surur. So they're trying to get the Sicilian boy to Egypt and get the Indian girl also to Egypt from Aden to get married there. So eventually, Surur and his family members made it to Fustat, and Ben Yiju and his daughter also made it to Fustat, and they got married there. This child of a Nair woman from the Malabar coast was wedded in 1156 to her Sicilian cousin in Fustat. Again, just demonstrating the cosmopolitan nature of this society, incredibly rich culturally with lots and lots of variety. Ghosh goes back to Egypt in 1988, following up with his friends. There's greater wealth for his formerly poverty-stricken friends based on their wages from manual labor in Iraq. They're working the oil fields and making so much more than the ones who stayed local, who relied on their education. Of course, this ended right about the time he's getting there. Iran-Iraq war is ending in 1988. Iraqi soldiers returning to their jobs, 2 to 3 million Egyptian workers getting kicked out abruptly. Um, they had good benefits while they were there, but once the need was over, then they were summarily fired and sent back. So he had a lot of trouble getting in touch with Nabil. Nabil managed to figure out a way to stick around. Of course, if you have education, you can make yourself useful. If you don't have education, all you can do is manual labor. Um, so he made himself indispensable and could stick around in Baghdad and continue to reap the benefit of that connection. Other Egyptians had trouble knowing what was going on with their family members in Iraq. As the 1990 and 1991 war begins, what we call the Gulf War. Sidi Abu Hasra, this is his last little story here. As Ghosh was leaving Damanhur, he finally decided to visit the shrine of this Muslim saint that he had heard about. Everyone talks about Sidi Abu Hasra. Go visit him. He's a convert from Judaism. He was born Jewish and then he converted to Islam. They're telling him that. So he nearly got himself and his driver arrested in his attempt to go because Sidi Abu Hasra is not really his name. And he was not really Muslim. He never converted to Islam. His name was always, for his whole life, Yaakov Abu Hadzera, a famous tzaddik, a Kabbalist and mystic of Jewish traditional religion. So he was always only ever a Jewish saint. His grave was visited, however, by Muslims and Jews alike, in the same way that any figure there who's a religious, important important point of barakah, important place, site of God's blessing, is going to be visited by Jewish, Christians, and Muslims, all of them. Um, and Sidi and Yaakov Abu Hadzera was the same thing. His grave was visited by Muslims and Jews alike, and specifically, annual pilgrimages were made directly from Israel after 1979. Right, so between 1956 or 1948, probably 1948 to 1979, Jews who loved Yaakov Abu Hadzera and came every year to his grave to pray were blocked. They were blocked because the Israel and the Israel-Egypt War of 1948 to 1979, basically 40 years of war, had blocked their access. After 1979, they're able to come back, but they're coming back to a much different place. It's no longer before 1949. Um, um, Jews and Christians and um, Muslims are living in this much more functional, fully functioning, multi-religious, multicultural society. After 1979, when they come, they're coming from a very rich country. They're coming from a famous enemy, 40 years of war with Egypt, and so they're very, very scared when they come that they're going to get blown up by terrorists, and the Egyptian government that is welcoming them and welcoming their uh, foreign currency that they're spending um, in Egypt. They're welcome to come, but under heavy guard because there's fear that they will be attacked. So that was the cause. So his grave is visited by these annual pilgrimages made directly from Israel. This was the cause of all the security. The Egyptian government was trying to protect the Israeli pilgrims. Ghosh found out about the saint not from scholars of religion or history, not big R, big H, religion and history, but little r, little h, the scholars of anthropology and folklore. That's where he finds out this information about this famous Jewish um, mystic and saint. Um, and he says, it was then that I began to realize how much a success the partitioning of the past had achieved. That I was sitting at that desk now, was because the Maulid of Sidi Abu Hasida was an anomaly within the categories of knowledge represented by these divisions. And we've just been through the state of Israel and how many divisions there are, and how many of this kind of people from this kind of background, and those kind of people from that kind of background, and how they vote, voting blocks and all the rest. This is all modernity. In the past, people were complicated and they didn't have those strict divisions. People merged and shifted back and forth. So these categories of knowledge, by this modern knowledge represented by these divisions, I had been caught straddling a border, unaware that the writing of big H history had predicated its own self-fulfillment. The writing down of history had determined that these people belong over here and those people belong over there, and these are separate, isolated categories that will never, ever be both and again. It's either or from here on out. So the epilogue is that Bama followed Ben Yiju all the way to Cairo. He left his homeland and he never went back. Died in Cairo, probably. Maybe he was freed at some point. Maybe he got married. We don't know. Nabil made it back to Egypt in the mass exodus of Egyptians and others out of Iraq in the build-up to the First Gulf War. Ismail did not, and we don't know what happened to him. I hope in an edition, if Amitav Ghosh ever makes a new edition of this book, that he'll follow up with some of these guys. Okay. When I show it, when I go through this book in the class, I show it with a film, and I'll include the in any clips I can find, I'll toss in there. It's a wonderful film, but it's just impossible to get free anymore. It used to be free online, and I'll dig around for it. It's called Cities of Light, um, about Al-Andalus, about this glorious history of southern Spain, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims mingled in a multicultural society, and everyone had access to education and a limited political power um, before 1492, when it became illegal to be of the wrong religion, either Jewish or Muslim, in Spain, and people were killed. It was a horrible, horrible thing, genocidal violence against Muslims and Jews that the Muslims and the Jews, when they had been ruling under Al-Andalus, had never ever done to the Christians. So we see these losses of multiculturalism, these losses of not perfect utopias, just ordinary societies like America is today, right? America is not a utopia. There's plenty of hatred and violence, but there's a rough and ready sort of equality here, where we can have people appointed to political leadership who are Jewish and Muslim, um, and people can get elected who are Jewish and Muslim. It's not a sort of a winner takes all Christian rule here in America, and that's how it was under Muslims in Al-Andalus. Just to show that there's another way. It could have been different. Okay, see you next week.